Gaeolin eyed the carcass, looking over his shoulder to his friend. There is no way we're going to clean this whole thing before Delphine rents out the rooms. Inigo twiddled a whisker, grinning to himself. Well, I did try to say we should bag something a bit less cumbersome. He absently itched at the fleas on his neck. Do you think Alvor would let you hang it behind his house while we turn in? Nah, let's not bother him this early. Help me move it to that tree. The pair huffed as their kill ironically continued to fight them beyond death. After much toil, the elk swayed from the branches of the pine, the blood dripping to stain the grass. Okay, a drink, maybe a snack before we call it good for tonight? I think I'll just grab a sweet roll and milk. Inigo yawned. The elf laughed. You know what Orgnar will say? Milk drinker. Whatever. He'll keep his mouth shut if he wants the venison. They waded across the river, shivering slightly in the frigid water. I just hope they kept a decent fire. They trudged down the road, the blazing embers of the blacksmith's forge greeting them. A guardsman nodded curtly to the hunters. Gaeolin returned the gesture, wishing that their third week of being here would inspire a bit more trust. You'd think we murdered a child. Inigo shrugged. I'm still not sorry. That chicken saw too much. If I hadn't killed it, they'd all be necromancer toys. It was Feindal's best hen. I am not apologizing for saving the town. Not for the first time, Gaeolin rolled his eyes at the paranoid Khajiit. The sign of the sleeping giant hung like a banner of comfort, beckoning them into the main room eagerly. The wood elf stretched his hands towards the flames, sighing in audible relief. Well, eat your cake, then go get some sleep. I want to head out as early as... But he stopped, smirking at the cat who had fallen asleep at the table. He let him rest, knowing that their days of leisure would end as soon as they left for Whiterun. For Ulfric and Skyri! The soldier's voice was cut short as the haft of Gaeolin's arrow pierced his throat. The man looked down for a moment, as if not believing his fate. Blood poured from his mouth with the final attempts at speech. Inigo watched his friend run after the last stormcloak, noticing a faint distortion. He smelled magic. As the wood elf drew his bow to aim, another Thalmor's invisibility spell ended, his blade raised above the Bosmer's head. Deftly, the Khajiit sprung forward, his ebony blade sinking into the soft moonstone of the armor. Death suits you, he hissed, drawing the sword out of his enemy. Gaeolin loosed his shot, watching as the fearless son of Skyrim crumpled beneath the force of it. He let out his breath, kneeling down as he realized how tired the fight had made him. Thank you, Inigo. I didn't even hear him behind me until you got him. I thought for a second I wasn't going to get him in time. He went to his horse, retrieving a rag to begin cleaning the blood from his sword. I'm still not sure why they decided to attack us too. In conflict, Gaeolin mused, there is no such thing as being neutral. Blood runs hot when swords clash. To the rebels, I was just another elf. To the Thalmor, I'm one of the lesser. He turned to his blue friend. The Stormcloaks, I might have been able to overlook. I don't agree with them, but I don't think to kill them on sight. But for these... He stared down into one of the elves' faces, his fist clenching. It's more personal. Inigo remained silent, not for the first time wondering what his friend meant by that. He slid his sword into the sheath that hung at Beast's side. She whinnied slightly at his touch, facing him with her dark brown eyes. He paused, finally asking, If it's okay, I'm curious about what happened between you and the Dominion. Gaeolin tugged his gloves tighter onto his hands. I'd rather we wait until some other time for that. It's a long story, and I may need a few drinks first. He turned to him, noticing blood on the cat's sleeve. Did you get hit? He walked over, inspecting Inigo's shoulder with concern. Save your magic, my friend. Inigo eyed the stain as his companion readied a healing spell. It's just blood from him. He gestured to the impaled Justicar. The sun was high above them, beating down to warm them despite the snow in the foothills. Come on, let's get moving. You said we'd get something to eat when we got to Falkreath. I'm hungry. Gaeolin laughed to himself, allowing a grin as they mounted up once again. As the road wound down to the alley, the sound of the forest life began to lull the pair into a more passive mood. A thrush trilled its sweet flute-like melody as it tended a nest. Inigo hummed to himself at the rear, tail twitching by his stirrup. Gaeolin closed his eyes, taking in the scent of the pines, pulling Nephenee's reins back to stop her. "What is it?" Inigo asked. The wood elf held up his hand for silence, sliding down to the road. He crouched, walking forward to the trunk of a tree. Inigo followed closely, cursing under his breath at what he saw. Ahead, covering the road through a small cliff, stretched a makeshift bridge. There was a brazier burning, providing a little extra warmth for a bandit. She was alone, it seemed, waiting for her comrades to return. Gaeolin turned, checking his quiver. "I've only got 16 arrows left." He looked back to their roadblock. "I'd rather not waste one on this." "We could try to sneak through the trees, bypass their little trap." He shook his head. "With the horses in tow? We'd be heard for miles with how clumsy Beast is." Inigo shot him a disgruntled look. "She needs her snacks. She's a growing girl. Around the middle, perhaps." Gaeolin drew his bow, knocking an arrow for the shot. He couldn't get a good shot here. The branches were getting in the way. He sneaked forward, seeing her through the sights of his bow. She was clueless, leaning against the railing lazily. It was perfect. His heart slammed as his foot broke a piece of dead wood under him. The sound cut through the silence, causing his prey to look up. She must have seen his bow's reflection. Drawing her own, she loosed an arrow at him. He lunged too late, the steel arrowhead slicing into his shoulder. He gasped, cursing at the sting. Inigo drew back his string, throwing a missile toward her. She rolled to the side deftly. "You'll have to try harder than that." Gaeolin tried once again to get his shot, but the highwayman was too quick. She planted a shot into his leg, bringing him to his knee. "Damn it!" But in that moment he noticed that her luck had run out. The last draw she had made caused her string to snap. Before she could react, he took aim, burying his arrow into her breast. She cried out, falling back onto the platform. Quick as a flash, the Indigo Khajiit soared over the bridge, slicing his blade across her throat with finality. "My friend, are you okay?" Inigo dropped his sword, running to his side. "Here, drink this." He unstopped the potion, ripping a piece of cloth off of the fringe of his shirt. He tied the bandage about the cut. Gaeolin nearly drowned as he inhaled the elixir. "Easy, easy!" He sagged to the ground, the pain making his eyes water. He looked down at the fletchling that stuck in his thigh. "Oh, that's going to be rough." Gods. Inigo looked at the wound, gingerly testing the bleeding area. He grimaced as Gaeolin hissed. I think maybe we should leave this for a healer. I'll go get the horses. Do you think you can make it to Falkreath with that?" Gaeolin moved his leg, wincing once again. "It's not the first time I'll have lived through being shot." Inigo looked mortified. "Please don't joke about that. I still feel horrible about it." But his friend only laughed, regretting it almost instantly. "Sorry. Yeah, help me on to Nephenee." It was night before they rode into the village, the sound of carousing pouring from the door of the inn. Gaeolin staggered as Inigo helped him walk. A guard saw them rushing forward. "Trouble on the roads?" "A bandit roadblock," Inigo explained. "We took out one, but there may be more. My friend is hurt. He needs a healer." The guard pointed down the road. "Runil's in the Hall of the Dead. I'll head there now to wake him." "Hall of the Dead," Gaeolin coughed. "So encouraging." Inigo shook his head. "Leave it to you to make wise cracks with an arrow embedded in your leg." They made their way past the tombstones, seeing smoke rise from the little shack on the hill. The door was open, a high elf waiting to guide them in. "Lie down here." He spoke softly, grabbing a sprig of blue flowers. "Chew this, but do not swallow." Gaeolin obeyed as the priest examined him. Inigo sat in a chair nearby, looking around the cabin with the peacefulness of an enraged farmer. Runil grabbed the arrow shaft, gently trying to turn it. Gaeolin grunted. He forced himself to keep from decking the man, chewing more fiercely on the plants he'd been given. Thankfully, the head is still attached, and it doesn't seem lodged into your bone. I can remove it with relative ease. He raised a hand, holding it above the Bosmer's face. A pale, warm light radiated from his palm, causing the pain to disappear. The healer picked up a metal tool, prying the flesh of his patient's thigh apart to see the barb. Inigo watched, turning away when he saw blood pouring out of his friend's leg. Suddenly, the Altmer held up the extracted missile, pressing a free hand against the skin. This time it burned. Gaeolin hissed as the muscle kneaded back together under the magical influence. Runil glared at the scar as it slowly melted away. After a few minutes, he let his hand fall, slumping back in his chair. Father Arcay be praised. He made a sign with his hand as Gaeolin sat up. You should rest for a day or two. You're out of danger, but there is still a lot of recovering to do. The dead man's drink has a few rooms if you care for them. Looking down at his leg, Gaeolin once again wished he'd invested more time in the restoration school. Thank you, Father. He dug in his coin purse, producing 30 septims. I know it's not that much, but please, accept this. Runil waved the coins away. Keep the gold. I'll just hold you to a favor someday. I have a feeling I'll be seeing you again. With that, he escorted them out of his house, causing the pair to frown. I guess we'll lay low here for a while. Inigo rubbed his shoulder, smearing the blood that was still somewhat wet around the fabric. Now let's go get that food you promised me. Gaeolin followed slowly, still a slight limp to his gait. He heard the howl of a wolf echo through the valley. His head spun, probably due to the loss of so much blood. Once again, he found himself thanking the gods for Inigo. Where would he have been if he had not saved him? There were 2 times just this day when the blue-furred ally had spared him an untimely demise. He looked up at Secunda, smiling as his companion once again complained of hunger. Inigo stretched, kicking the blankets off as he woke. The smell of fresh bread filled the dead man's drink, causing his stomach to rumble. The Khajiit sprung to his feet. As he entered the main room, he waved to the innkeeper. "Good morning." "Good morning," she replied. "Bread's almost ready if you're hungry." "I'd rather wait until after I check on my friend." He nodded his thanks, heading into Gaeolin's room. The elf was lying on his back, eyes closed as his chest rose and fell rhythmically. He stepped in, mischief on the mind. Perhaps some fire salts on his lips wake him up with a burning sensation? Or maybe he could finally expand on that tattoo on his cheek. Just 2 steps closer, and the elf picked up his head. A single blue eye stared at him from behind a curtain of hair. "You never knock, do you?" Inigo turned one ear back, betraying his mild guilt. "But what would I knock on? There's no door." "There's always the door jamb." Gaeolin sat up, testing his leg. He stood when he felt no pain. "I'm going to get some air. Something smells foul." Inigo grimaced. "Sorry, that may be my boots. I must have learned to tune them out." "We'll ask about some before we leave town. Maybe something that doesn't do so badly with water." Inigo had had those shoes since Gaeolin had found him in Riften. They had waded through many soggy places after that point, and the odor was beginning to become unbearable. He grabbed his sword, groaning at the weathered scabbard. You could actually see the blade shining through the leather about 2 hands up the blade. "I think I'll also swing by the smithy. This old thing's got to go." Slinging his quiver and bow behind him, he pushed past to the dining room. The barkeep smiled at him as he passed. He nodded politely, trying his best to avoid the hungry gaze she sent him. Even more reason to get moving soon. It wasn't that he was opposed to relationships. He just didn't like the whimsical Nord approach to marriage. Elves lived too long for anything so brief. He swung the door out, squinting as the midday sun scalded his eyes. The air was clean and cool. The Bosmer leaned against the banister, listening to the chickens clucking away in the street. He brushed his bangs out of his eyes as he thought of his close call again. Maybe it's time to invest in some armor. "Honestly," Runil spoke to him, having come to stand beside him, If you had been wearing any more than your clothes, I might have been unable to pull you through. Armor adds just another layer I have to work through. Keep it light and just stay more alert next time, Archer. Gaeolin stared across the street. Again, I thank you. I still wish you'd let me pay you. He smirked. My list of life debts is getting uncomfortably long. Ronil returned the expression. You'll find very few folk around here will hold that debt above you. Just help out. Be kind. Do your part in the divine plan, and your debts are as good as repaid. The wood elf shifted a little, turning to talk about the rumors Ronil may have heard, when a courier approached the notice board that hung from the post on the steps. He watched as the messenger dug in his bag, drawing out a few rolled-up bits of parchment. He hammered them onto the board, sending the two men a wave before he walked into the tavern. Gaeolin abandoned the railing, reading the board with a keen eye. Injury or no, he needed the gold. One letter in particular caught his eye. Investigation request. By order of Jarl Igmund of Markarth, to all able-bodied men and women of the Reach, 2 beloved citizens have disappeared from our hold. A reward will be offered to anyone who investigates and discovers what has become of them. Rayrek. He tore the letter down, folding it before placing it in his bag. He made his way to the blacksmith across the town thoroughfare. The smith was hammering away at what could only be intended as a future claymore. He quenched the glowing blade, turning to greet his customer. Well met, traveler. He looked down at the decrepit sheath. I'm guessing I know why you're here. Gaeolin unbuckled his belt, handing the weapon to the forge master. I don't suppose you could repair this. The man drew the blade, cringing at all the dents and scratches on the blade. At the risk of being rude, why? He looked down the blade, tapping the pommel as he continued. I haven't seen a blade in this poor of shape since I was an apprentice in Solitude. The best I could do is try and grind it sharp again, but that won't help the cracks in the heart of the blade. What have you been doing with this sword? Fighting to survive, Gaeolin quipped. Gaeolin of Woodhearth. He offered his hand. The blacksmith sheathed the weapon, accepting the gesture. Laud. Born and raised here in Falkreath, trained in Solitude. Long way from home, huh? Gaeolin shrugged. It's been a long time since Valen Wood was my home. I've been wandering for years. He looked at the racks of weapons hanging near the forge. There were maces, war axes, war hammers, everything but what he needed. You wouldn't happen to have something this size, maybe a hand-and-a-half blade? Laud shook his head. Sorry, there's not many swordsmen around here. I mainly keep broadswords and axes made up. He scratched his chin. I could forge something simple as a temporary solution, but I'd rather refer you to someone like Jorlund Greymane. The man makes exquisite equipment for Jorvaskr. The elf rubbed his temple. Whiterun was not en route to Markarth. You're sure there's nothing here like this? Yes. He looked slightly annoyed. I forged everything I have. Gaeolin sighed. Fine. Do what you can for me. I'll return in a few hours to check on your progress. How much should I expect? I'd say 30 septims, even. Are you? He stopped himself. Very well. I'll come back later. It was late morning when the pair departed Falkreath. Nephany huffed as they climbed the hill through the towering pines, the air still biting Gaeolin's ears with its chill. His sword gently beat against Nephany's harness. The blacksmith had actually done a better job than he'd expected. The edge was true, but the heart still looked questionable. Fortunately, he rarely used it. Inigo sang to himself a little behind, passing the time in his usual fashion. Riding, 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 my backside is subsiding. He threw his hands in the air with enthusiasm. Riding high, swooping low, find a bride, be denied, soar hide. The elf looked back with a smirk. Having fun? Yes, Inigo replied. I feel particularly lively today. He nudged the beast into a faster pace. Something feels charged this morning. Gaeolin stayed quiet. The breeze shifted from the south, carrying smoke through the trees. The pair heard a blood-curdling scream. The elf slapped his reins, tearing through the woods towards the sound. As they drew near, the smell of burnt flesh invaded their senses. Inigo coughed, pulling a cloth out of his saddlebags to cover his face. Coming to a stop, Gaeolin slid from his horse, drawing his sword in spite of the total destruction they found. Flames crackled everywhere. A cart sat with its wheel gone. The horses were dead, but still better off than their smouldering masters. The corpse of what had once been a man knelt in the center of the carnage. He appeared to have been attempting to cast a spell. To what end, he couldn't guess. By the gods! Inigo eyed the scene. What happened here? Who knows? Maybe it was a rogue mage, or a necromancer. Doesn't add up to the latter, though. No necromancer I've seen leaves perfectly good corpses behind. He saw a cloak flutter from the seat of the cart, landing at his feet. He sheathed his sword, picking up the linen to inspect it. The brooch at the base of the hood struck him. His expression went blank. Gaeolin stared into the silver, his face distorting slowly. Inigo moved to stand next to him with another cough. The Khajiit turned, noticing the pained look in his friend's eyes. Gaeolin, are you okay? This was from Woodhearth. They were from my home, back in Valenwood. He clenched the cloth tighter. I didn't think anyone else had escaped. Escaped? The elf didn't answer. He massaged the fastener. The silver was wrapped around a dark sapphire. There was also fine vine engravings, widening around almost infinitely. My mother had a brooch just like this. She always said it was her lucky charm. He inspected the cloak. It had a few holes where it had been burned through, but was still mostly good. I wish I had hers. Just take this one, Inigo offered, as a memento. Clearly they won't miss it. He watched as his comrade threw the cloak over his shoulders. You've never mentioned your family before. Gaeolin turned to face him. I don't often. Even after 30-some years, the loss is tough. This scene haunts me because I saw a similar one before. The flames were starting to fade out under the wind. The Dominion killed my parents and brother, burned our village to the ground in the war. He fell silent. Inigo didn't feel it appropriate to speak. How did you press this conversation? I can't. Gaeolin cleared his throat. I'm sorry, Inigo. I'm not ready to talk about this. I accept that. The cat scratched at some fleas awkwardly. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. He pulled his gloves on further. Let's keep A roar split the air, Nephanian beast tearing through the trees with cries of terror. A rush of wind nearly bent the pines to the ground. A wall of heat knocked the pair down. Eyes forced to the sky, Gaeolin's vision was overwhelmed by a rush of grey. The earth shook with a growl. Gaeolin rolled to his feet, his sword in hand as he faced the source. The dragon snarled, blue flames flickering in its maw. In an instant, the pair dodged a jet of flames. Forsaking safety, Inigo ran forward, slashing wildly with his ebony blade at the beast's leathery wing. As its head swung around, the Bosmer rushed, hacking at the soft space at the base of its skull. The edge struck, causing the drake to screech. It turned to devour him. The dragonfire ignited his shirt. Inigo, no mage, fortunately managed to extinguish the inferno with a burst of fated frost. The dragon became dazed by the sudden flash of magicka. In that moment, Gaeolin forced the point of his sword into the beast's eye. It reared up, beating its wings to flee. Gaeolin's weapon shattered, shards flying to the road as acidic blood dissolved the hilt. Cursing, he drew his bow, running after the monster with fury. "Gaeolin, you idiot!" Inigo ran after him. "You're going to be killed!" The dragon made for Lake Ilinalta. Gaeolin skidded to a stop at the shore, firing off 4 arrows in mere moments. 3 tore the webbing of the wings, making the scale tear veer to shore. The last embedded in the soft underbelly. It crashed down, skidding through the wood, felling trees until it once again met the road. Not thinking, the wood elf drew his hunting knife. Leaping onto its neck, he stabbed it in the eyes, the creature writhing to evade the killing blade. With a last gasp, it collapsed with the certainty of death. Inigo rushed to them, stopping a short distance away as the winds changed. A rushing sound filled his ears. He saw the dragon begin to burn from the inside out. Gaeolin fell to a knee, his body beginning to glow. Tendrils wound from the corpse, wrapping around his friend. The elf coughed, his breath short, as the life force of the ancient lizard invaded him. The pain, terrible pain as hot, raw, instinctual knowledge burned his mind. Veins bulged on his neck, sweat beading on his forehead. He held his head, standing shakily. Turning his head to the sky, he cried out, "Yol!" A gout of flames scorched the tallest branches. The birds flew in horror as their homes were set ablaze. Inigo was frozen, staring as the shout faded, and Gaeolin crumpled to the ground. He dropped his sword, running to him. He would die. If he hadn't yet, Gaeolin would, unless he found a way to control this power. "You fool! I begged you!"